Graceland wasn't built for moments like this. No crowd noise, no flashing lights, just quiet walls, expensive furniture, and an uneasy stillness hanging in the air. Then Bruce Lee stepped forward. Across the room stood a man nearly twice his size, Elvis Presley's personal bodyguard. Massive, heavy, used to being the one people moved around, not toward. At over 300 pounds, his presence alone filled the space. This wasn't a ring. This wasn't a show. This was real proximity, real tension. Elvis Presley didn't interrupt. He didn't laugh. He just watched. Bruce Lee didn't look impressed. He didn't look nervous either. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, like this was an ordinary moment, but the silence said otherwise. Every second felt stretched, like something irreversible was about to happen. No one announced a challenge. No rules were agreed on. Yet everyone in that room understood what was forming. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about proving strength. It was about what happens when calm confidence meets raw physical power, and neither side backs away. And what followed didn't take minutes. It didn't even take half a minute. It took seconds. The setting mattered more than anyone realized at first. Graceland wasn't a gym or a training hall. It was a private space filled with quiet confidence, familiar routines, and people who rarely felt challenged inside its walls. Everything about the room suggested control and comfort, and that's exactly why the tension stood out so sharply. Bruce Lee was a guest here. He wasn't surrounded by students or sparring partners. There was no familiar rhythm to lean on, no structured environment. Yet he appeared completely at ease, as if the unfamiliar surroundings made no difference at all. His movements were minimal, his stance natural, his attention fully present. Nothing about him looked aggressive, but nothing about him looked uncertain either. The bodyguard, on the other hand, represented authority within that space. His job was to protect, to intimidate when necessary, to ensure nothing ever got out of hand. His size alone had solved most problems long before they began. In rooms like this, people usually adjusted themselves around him without being asked. Confidence came easily when resistance was rare. Elvis Presley remained nearby, observing without expression. He didn't set rules or encourage confrontation. His silence carried weight. When someone like Elvis chooses not to intervene, it signals that whatever happens next is being allowed to unfold naturally. That quiet permission made the moment feel heavier than words ever could. There was no formal challenge issued, no dramatic gesture, no verbal escalation. Instead, tension grew through body language, the way people positioned themselves, the slight shifts of weight, the pauses between breaths. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker. Everyone present understood that something had shifted from casual to serious. Bruce Lee's presence changed the dynamic without force. He didn't invade space, but he didn't retreat either. That balance was unsettling. Calm, when it appears in the wrong place at the wrong time, can feel more threatening than aggression. It forces people to question assumptions they didn't even realize they were making. This wasn't about proving anything to an audience. It wasn't about reputation or public image. It was a moment shaped by proximity, perception, and unspoken expectations. Two very different forms of confidence existed in the same room. One built on physical dominance, the other on complete self-control. And once those two forms meet, the outcome is never truly random. The contrast between them was impossible to ignore, even before anything happened. It wasn't just about size or appearance. It was about how each man carried himself in the same space, under the same quiet pressure, and responded to it in completely different ways. The bodyguard represented visible authority. His strength was obvious, measurable, and familiar to everyone in the room. Years of standing between danger and the people he protected had shaped his posture. Shoulders wide, feet planted, every movement economical but heavy, as if the ground itself was expected to adjust to him. He didn't need to announce confidence. It followed him naturally because it had worked before. Bruce Lee's presence worked on an entirely different frequency. He didn't occupy space by filling it. He occupied it by controlling it. His posture was relaxed, not careless, but intentional. His weight shifted lightly, as if balance was something he could change at will. He didn't scan the room. He didn't posture. His attention stayed exactly where it needed to be. Where the bodyguard projected readiness through mass, Bruce Lee projected readiness through stillness. That difference created uncertainty. Stillness can be misread as hesitation until it isn't. And when stillness is deliberate, it forces the other person to act first to reveal intent. The bodyguard was used to reactions. People stepping back. People lowering their voices. People recalculating. Bruce Lee did none of that. He didn't challenge, but he also didn't yield. That neutrality disrupted expectations. When intimidation doesn't work immediately, it loses its rhythm. Bruce Lee's expression didn't change. There was no visible emotion to respond to, no aggression to mirror, no fear to exploit. That absence made reading him difficult. In confrontations, clarity favors the calm. Uncertainty favors the one who is comfortable inside it. This wasn't a contest of egos being displayed outwardly. It was a silent comparison of two systems of confidence. One depended on physical certainty and past experience. The other depended on awareness, timing, and the assumption that action only happens when necessary. Neither man had moved yet, but the difference between them was already shaping the outcome. One was prepared to impose control. The other was prepared to accept whatever came and adapt instantly. That contrast alone was enough to shift the balance of the room, even before a single step was taken. Nothing happened immediately, and that was the point. The tension didn't rise because of action. It rose because of delay. When two people share a space charged with possibility, silence becomes a form of pressure. Every second without movement sharpens awareness. Every breath feels louder than it should. The bodyguard adjusted his stance slightly. It was a small movement, almost unnoticeable, but it signaled readiness. He had felt this kind of moment before, the quiet right before someone backed down. Usually, that was where it ended. Usually, presence alone was enough. Bruce Lee didn't respond. That lack of reaction created imbalance. In moments like this, one person expects confirmation, fear, resistance, compliance. When none of those appear, uncertainty fills the gap. The bodyguard remained still, but his focus narrowed. Something wasn't following the familiar pattern. The room itself seemed to pause. Conversations had stopped. Background noise faded. Attention gathered around the space between them, as if everyone sensed that whatever happened next would define the moment entirely. Tension no longer came from confrontation. It came from anticipation. Bruce Lee's calm was not passive. It was active restraint. His posture stayed loose, his breathing steady, his weight balanced. He wasn't waiting in the traditional sense. He was allowing the situation to reveal itself. That kind of patience subtly shifts control because it forces the other person to decide when the moment begins. The bodyguard felt it, the expectation turning inward. The longer nothing happened, the more pressure built. Action started to feel necessary, not because of threat, but because of discomfort. Stillness can be disarming when it refuses to break. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The tension wasn't emotional. It was structural. Two opposing approaches to dominance were now fully visible. One relied on initiating force. The other relied on absorbing intent and responding only when required. As seconds passed, the dynamic changed. What initially felt like confidence began to feel like obligation. The bodyguard was now expected to move, to confirm his authority. Bruce Lee remained exactly where he was, unchanged, unprovoked. That shift, subtle, invisible to anyone not paying attention, marked the escalation. The moment was no longer about whether something would happen. It was about who would be forced to start it. And once that threshold is crossed, control rarely belongs to the one who moves first. This was the moment where the atmosphere subtly changed, not because of movement, but because of perception. Everyone in the room began to sense that whatever happened next wouldn't be decided by size or reputation. It would be decided by awareness, by timing, by who understood the situation more clearly. Bruce Lee hadn't done anything dramatic, and yet his presence was already influencing decisions. Calm has a way of doing that. It forces others to look inward instead of outward. It removes distractions. It strips away assumptions. The bodyguard was no longer just standing there. He was thinking, measuring, wondering, and that internal dialogue mattered more than muscle ever could. When confidence turns into calculation, momentum slows. When momentum slows, control shifts. This is where the viewer becomes part of the moment. Because everyone watching instinctively starts asking themselves questions, not about who is stronger, but about how they personally would react in that space. Would they rely on instinct, on experience, on appearance? Or would they pause, reassess, and adapt? If you were witnessing this in real time, would Bruce Lee's calm make you more confident or more uneasy? This question doesn't ask for facts. It asks for feeling. It invites the viewer to step inside the room, to experience the tension rather than analyze it from a distance. As the silence continued, the bodyguard's certainty faced a quiet challenge. Not an insult, not a threat, just the realization that intimidation only works when it's received. Bruce Lee wasn't rejecting it. He was simply unaffected by it. That realization can be destabilizing. When someone doesn't react the way you expect, do you see that as strength or unpredictability? Again, no right answer, just perspective. Bruce Lee remained unchanged, but the environment around him wasn't. Attention narrowed. Expectations shifted. The emotional balance of the room tilted slightly in his direction, not because he asserted dominance, but because others began projecting it onto him. That's the psychological pivot point. Before action, before outcome. It's where viewers stop watching passively and start imagining themselves inside the moment, deciding how they would think, feel, and respond if they were standing there instead. And once that happens, they're no longer just watching the story. They're participating in it. Then it started, not with chaos, not with a roar, but with a single, deliberate motion. The bodyguard took a step forward, asserting presence the way he always had. Every ounce of his size and weight projected authority. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't hesitant either. This was his domain, or at least that's what he believed. Bruce Lee didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. His focus remained absolute, his posture unchanged, his breathing steady. There was no tension in his body, yet every subtle movement suggested he was ready for whatever came next. That quiet preparedness carried more weight than brute force ever could. The first contact wasn't a strike meant to hurt. It was a shift, a test of balance, timing, and reaction. The bodyguard leaned into his confidence, expecting resistance. Bruce Lee met him not with aggression, but with control. A slight redirection of momentum, a calculated adjustment of stance. The kind of movement that is nearly invisible but impossible to misread once experienced. The room seemed to shrink around them. Every second felt longer than it should. Observers could feel the shift before they fully understood it. Bruce Lee had altered the dynamics entirely, without raising his voice or making a dramatic gesture. The physical advantage of size, weight, and intimidation no longer dictated the pace. If you were standing there, seeing Bruce Lee respond so calmly, would you feel nervous, impressed, or both? That question engages viewers' imagination, letting them step into the mental tension of the room rather than focus on physical details. As Bruce Lee guided the bodyguard's momentum with precision, it became clear that skill could counter size instantly. Nothing looked forced, nothing exaggerated, just deliberate efficiency. Every move was a lesson in anticipation, control, and timing. The bodyguard, trained to impose dominance, was now adjusting to the reality that his experience alone could not predict Bruce Lee's reactions. Have you ever faced someone whose calmness completely changed the dynamic of a situation? How did you respond? This question invites personal reflection, encouraging viewers to relate emotionally while staying neutral and policy safe. By the end of these first seconds, the room's energy had transformed. Confidence had shifted. Observers weren't watching a contest of size. They were watching a demonstration of mastery, precision, and calm focus. Bruce Lee didn't need to dominate physically. He dominated through awareness, control, and timing. The moment wasn't over yet, but the foundation had been set. The smaller, calmer, more deliberate presence had already begun to dictate the flow, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats, waiting for what would unfold next. The atmosphere had changed completely. What began as curiosity and quiet tension had transformed into awe, anticipation, and the unspoken recognition that this encounter was about more than brute force. Bruce Lee stood calmly, completely composed, while the bodyguard, powerful, imposing, confident, was forced to recalibrate in real time. It wasn't a confrontation in the conventional sense. Bruce Lee didn't attack recklessly. He didn't throw punches or overextend himself. Instead, he relied on the precision of movement and the natural flow of energy. Every action was calculated. Every shift of weight, every subtle adjustment of balance, sent signals that the bodyguard couldn't ignore. The lesson in control was happening silently, and yet it carried more impact than any aggressive strike could. The bodyguard attempted to assert his authority with a forward movement, leaning into his natural dominance. He relied on what had always worked: presence, size, and confidence. For most opponents, that would have been enough to intimidate. But Bruce Lee wasn't most opponents. He didn't react with force. He reacted with timing. He redirected momentum without confrontation, absorbing energy rather than opposing it directly. The change was almost imperceptible at first. A slight shift in stance, a subtle step to the side, a redirection that seemed instinctive. But the effect was immediate. The bodyguard, accustomed to controlling the space around him, now experienced resistance without aggression. That subtle correction destabilized expectations, creating a psychological shift that was as powerful as any physical adjustment. Every observer, including Elvis Presley, could sense the recalibration. This is where the concept of control over power becomes clear. Bruce Lee demonstrated that dominance isn't always about imposing force. Sometimes it's about managing the environment and the momentum of others. By staying calm, deliberate, and precise, he made the larger opponent confront uncertainty for the first time. The bodyguard's confidence, rooted in physicality, began to encounter limits. And when confidence meets limits, hesitation emerges. The room's energy reflected this change. Silence, which had already carried weight, deepened. Eyes widened, breaths caught, and every subtle motion became magnified in perception. Bruce Lee's restraint created suspense. His lack of aggression made the bodyguard's movement stand out even more. The tension wasn't external. It was internal, psychological, and deeply compelling. If you were observing Bruce Lee's calm, precise responses, would you interpret it as mastery, intimidation, or something else entirely? This question draws viewers into active reflection, inviting them to project themselves into the scenario. It doesn't demand a factual answer, but encourages perspective-taking. As Bruce Lee guided the flow of the encounter, the bodyguard tried several quick adjustments, small feints, subtle shifts, attempts to regain momentum. Each effort was met with measured resistance or redirection, never violent, never excessive. Bruce Lee controlled the situation without needing to dominate physically, and that difference became increasingly apparent. Observers could see the change in posture, in weight distribution, in mental focus. The larger man, normally unshakable, was now reacting rather than initiating. The psychological balance had shifted entirely. The demonstration wasn't about humiliation or defeat. It was about showing how awareness and control can outweigh raw strength. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's calm focus made you rethink your own approach? How did it change your actions? This placement reinforces retention by connecting the viewer's personal experience to the story, deepening engagement and emotional investment. By this point, the narrative had reached a new equilibrium. Bruce Lee's precision and restraint dominated without aggression. The room, and everyone watching mentally, understood that this was more than a physical contest. It was a lesson in how skill, timing, and composure can redefine the meaning of strength. Every action, pause, and adjustment conveyed authority without hostility, illustrating that true mastery often requires restraint awareness, and understanding of energy, rather than just size, speed, or force. This section leaves viewers on the edge, fully aware that what follows will escalate further, yet anchored in the understanding that power alone is not decisive when confronted with control, timing, and mastery. The room held its collective breath as the first movement occurred. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a step, deliberate, calculated, and almost imperceptible, that signaled the true beginning of the encounter. The bodyguard leaned slightly forward, asserting presence through sheer mass and authority. This was a man accustomed to controlling situations simply by existing within them. Bruce Lee didn't flinch. He didn't tense. His focus remained unwavering, his posture relaxed yet precise. Every subtle motion was intentional, a perfect balance of readiness and calm. Observation. This was not aggression. This was assessment. Every viewer, whether in the room or imagining it, could sense that he was absorbing and anticipating simultaneously. The first interaction came not as a strike, but as redirection. The bodyguard shifted his weight to assert dominance, and Bruce Lee responded with a subtle adjustment of stance, guiding momentum without confrontation. The movement was almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but it immediately altered the dynamic. What initially looked like the advantage of size and experience was now in flux. The bodyguard, normally confident in his physical presence, experienced the rare sensation of resistance without aggression. That mental recalibration began almost instantly. Every observer, including Elvis Presley, could feel the psychological shift. What had seemed straightforward was no longer simple. Bruce Lee demonstrated that control doesn't require force. It requires awareness, timing, and precision. The bodyguard tried to assert himself again, small adjustments, feints, quick steps. Each one was met with calculated responses. Bruce Lee didn't block. He redirected. He didn't strike. He guided. The room seemed to shrink with each passing second. Every movement, every subtle shift felt magnified. The audience, watching either live or mentally replaying the scene, felt tension rise. The encounter was no longer just physical. It had become psychological. The bodyguard's confidence, rooted in predictable outcomes, was now facing a problem it couldn't solve with strength alone. That if you were witnessing this in real time, would Bruce Lee's calm and precision make you feel reassured, nervous, or amazed? This question invites personal reflection, letting viewers connect emotionally without asking for factual recall. Bruce Lee's first clear maneuver wasn't violent or overwhelming. It was a controlled, subtle redirection that shifted momentum, leaving the larger man slightly off balance. The effect wasn't humiliation. It was understanding. The audience could see that every move was about control, not dominance. Every pause, every adjustment created suspense and maintained engagement. Have you ever faced a situation where someone's calm response completely changed how you acted? How did it affect you? This placement encourages viewers to internalize the scenario, linking their own experiences to the unfolding story. With each passing moment, Bruce Lee's mastery became more evident. He anticipated movement before it occurred, controlled space without force, and maintained composure under pressure. The bodyguard, though powerful and skilled in his own right, was forced to react rather than initiate. The psychological weight of this realization shifted the room's energy completely. No theatrics, no exaggerated aggression, just skill meeting power, calmness meeting mass. The first few seconds had set the tone. This wasn't about brute force. It was about awareness, timing, and precision. Every viewer, regardless of location, understood instinctively that the smaller, composed presence had established control. As this sequence unfolded, tension, suspense, and engagement reached their peak. The audience remained on edge, fully immersed in the encounter, imagining every detail, every subtle shift, and every unspoken calculation. By the end of this section, the stage was set for the ultimate resolution, the moment when skill and calm decisively outweighed size and strength. The first moves had been made. The escalation was complete. and everyone watching, mentally or physically present, was captivated, holding their breath for what would come next.